Christmas night was supposed to feel warm. The house was filled with soft yellow lights, the smell of cinnamon, pine, and something sweet baking in the oven. Snow pressed gently against the windows, muting the world outside. The kind of silence that usually feels peaceful, but that night, it didn't. I was 19, old enough to understand discomfort, young enough to doubt myself. My father had already gone to bed early. He always did on holidays. Too much wine, too many memories. Too much exhaustion pretending everything was fine. That left just me and her, my stepmother. She moved through the house quietly, almost carefully, like she didn't want the walls to hear her footsteps. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. The clink of a spoon, the hum of the heater, the ticking clock above the fireplace. "Can you help me for a moment?" she asked. Her voice was calm, normal, too normal. I followed her into the living room. The Christmas tree stood tall, glowing softly, ornaments reflecting the lights like watching eyes. She didn't turn on the main lights, only the lamp near the couch. The shadows felt heavier there. She sat before I did. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Usually she stood, commanding, in control. But tonight she looked smaller, her shoulders tense, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I've been meaning to talk to you," she said. Nothing about her words crossed a line, but something in the way she said them did. She spoke about family, about responsibility, about how hard it was to keep things together, how lonely it felt when people didn't notice your sacrifices. Her eyes stayed on me longer than necessary, not touching, not smiling, just watching. I nodded, unsure what she wanted from me. Then she said my name, slowly, carefully, as if testing how it sounded in the room. "You understand me better than anyone here." That was the moment my chest tightened. Because that wasn't true, and it wasn't appropriate. And yet, it felt intentional. She leaned forward slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough to shift the air between us. "I just need you to listen," she added. Listening felt like stepping into something I couldn't see. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just a conversation, that I was overthinking, but my instincts were louder than my thoughts. The room felt smaller. The lights felt dimmer, and Christmas, something that once meant safety, suddenly felt unfamiliar. When I finally stood to leave, she didn't stop me. She just said one last thing softly. "Don't tell your father. He wouldn't understand." That sentence followed me all the way to my room. And I didn't sleep that night. Because deep down I knew some boundaries aren't crossed with actions. They're crossed with intent. Chapter 2. The silence that felt louder than words. Christmas morning arrived quietly, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I woke up before anyone else. The hallway lights were still off, the air cold, the walls unfamiliar despite years spent inside them. What happened the night before replayed in fragments, not actions. Not words, but feelings, confusion, pressure. A sense that something invisible had shifted. At the dining table, my stepmother sat already dressed, calm, composed, as if nothing unusual had occurred. She greeted me with a gentle smile and asked if I slept well. I nodded. That was the first mistake, because silence, when forced, becomes a lie you keep telling yourself. Throughout the day, she acted normal, too normal, helping my father with preparations, laughing softly, playing the role everyone expected her to play. But every time our eyes met, I felt an unspoken weight settle in my chest. She never said anything inappropriate. She never crossed a visible line. But control doesn't always come from touch. Sometimes it comes from suggestion, guilt, and power imbalance. Later that afternoon, she asked me to help bring boxes from the garage. My father was busy. The house was loud with holiday music, but the garage felt like another world. She spoke carefully about responsibility, about family loyalty, about how some situations were better, left unspoken for everyone's good. Her words were soft, almost kind. Yet each sentence felt like a quiet warning wrapped in concern. I realized then, this wasn't about a moment. This was about influence. That night, lying awake, I understood something important. Not all boundaries are broken loudly. Some are erased slowly until you don't know where you're allowed to stand anymore. And I promised myself one thing. I would not stay silent forever. Chapter 3. The Quiet Control. Christmas passed, but the air inside the house never returned to normal. What happened that night wasn't spoken aloud. It didn't need to be. Silence became the new language. My stepmom didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten me. That would have been obvious. Instead, she changed everything quietly. She controlled the house with kindness that felt heavier than anger. She decided when dinner was ready. She chose when the lights went off. She asked questions that sounded caring but felt like traps. "Are you sleeping well? You look tired lately. Do you feel safe talking to me?" Every sentence came with a smile. I began to notice patterns. If I stayed in my room, she'd knock just to check on me. If I avoided eye contact, she'd bring me tea and sit too close. If I pulled away emotionally, she'd remind me how much she had done for me. Nothing illegal, nothing obvious, but everything intentional. I started doubting myself. Was I imagining it? Was I overreacting? Why did I feel guilty for wanting distance? That's how control works. It convinces you that your discomfort is your fault. She never crossed a visible line. She just stood so close to it that I couldn't breathe. One evening, she said something that changed everything. "You know," she said softly, "people misunderstand care when they've never received it properly." That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't about love. It was about power. She didn't want affection. She wanted obedience. And if I didn't wake up now, I'd lose more than my peace. I'd lose myself. That night, I made a quiet decision. I would stop reacting, stop explaining, stop doubting my instincts. I would observe. Because the only way to survive psychological control is to understand the person who's using it. And once you understand them, they lose their grip. Chapter 4. The Silent Control. By Christmas morning, the house felt colder than the snow outside. Not because of winter, but because of silence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten me. That was the most terrifying part. My stepmom controlled the house with looks, with pauses, with carefully chosen words that sounded caring to everyone else, but felt like chains to me. At breakfast, she placed a mug of coffee in front of me. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, smiling. My father nodded approvingly from across the table. To him, she was perfect. I nodded back, afraid that if I said anything else, she'd twist it later. She leaned closer, her voice soft. "You don't have to tell anyone what you feel. Families solve things quietly." That word, quietly, stuck in my chest. Later that day, she found me alone near the window, watching snow fall. "You're confused," she said gently. "People won't understand you the way I do." It wasn't comfort. It was isolation. She reminded me how much she'd done for us, how my father trusted her, how breaking that peace would hurt everyone, and suddenly the burden wasn't on her actions anymore. It was on my silence. That night, I realized something painful. She wasn't crossing lines loudly. She was moving them slowly so no one noticed. And if I didn't find my strength soon, I would disappear inside this house without anyone realizing I was gone. Chapter 5. The moment I finally understood. Christmas was over, but something inside me hadn't settled. The house felt quieter now, not peaceful, just hollow. Decorations still hung on the walls. Lights blinking like they were pretending nothing had happened. My father had already left early for work, unaware of the tension that had grown roots inside me. She avoided me that morning. No forced smiles, no controlling tone, no instructions disguised as care. That absence scared me more than her presence ever had. I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at my phone, replaying memories I had never questioned before. Every decision I made, every doubt I had about myself, it all traced back to moments when she had spoken for me, decided for me, corrected me in front of others, and praised me only when I followed her expectations. I realized something painful. She never needed to touch boundaries to cross them. She had crossed them with words, silence, and authority. That night in the hallway wasn't a sudden mistake. It was the moment her control slipped, and I finally saw it. I remembered how she used guilt like a weapon, how she made me feel ungrateful when I questioned her, how she framed herself as the only one who understood me. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't scared anymore. I was awake. That evening, she finally spoke to me again. Her voice was calm, measured, too calm. "You've been distant," she said. I looked at her, really looked this time. Not as a child seeking approval, but as someone recognizing manipulation. "I'm thinking," I replied. Her expression shifted, not anger, not sadness, but something close to fear. Because control only works when the other person doesn't realize they're being controlled. And that was the moment she knew. She had lost her hold on me. Chapter 6. The Truth I Couldn't Unsee. By Christmas morning, I hadn't slept. The house was silent, but my mind wasn't. Every word she had spoken, every look, Every carefully chosen moment replayed again and again, not as memories, but as patterns. That's when I understood something terrifying. This wasn't a single mistake. This wasn't confusion. It was control. I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at my phone, scrolling through old messages, not just from her, but from my past. Slowly, painfully, I noticed how often she had positioned herself as the only one who understood me, how she subtly separated me from others, my friends, my father, even my own instincts. She never told me what to do. She didn't have to. She only planted doubts. They don't really listen to you. You're more mature than people your age. I worry about you because no one else does. At the time, it felt like care. Now it felt like a net tightening. When I looked up, I saw my reflection in the dark window. And for the first time, I didn't recognize myself. I wasn't scared of her. I was scared of how long it took me to see this. Later that day, my father spoke about future plans. She interrupted gently, corrected him softly, guided the conversation away from me, the same way she always did when I tried to speak for myself. And that's when it happened. I didn't react. I didn't argue. I simply stayed silent, on purpose. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, because silence was something she couldn't guide. That night, lying in bed, I made a decision she didn't expect. I wouldn't confront her. I wouldn't expose anything. I would take my power back quietly. Because the most dangerous thing for someone who controls others is a person who finally understands the game and stops playing. Chapter 7. The Morning After, When Silence Spoke Louder Than Truth. Christmas morning arrived quietly, almost cruel in its calm. The house was filled with light, soft winter sunlight slipping through the curtains, landing on decorations that now felt hollow. The tree still stood in the corner, ornaments glittering like nothing had changed. But everything had. I woke up early not because I was rested, but because sleep refused to stay with me. What happened the night before had no single moment I could point to, no clear scene, no dramatic explosion. It was worse than that. It was confusion, emotional pressure. Lines blurred slowly until they disappeared. And now, in the cold clarity of morning, I finally understood something important. What I experienced wasn't love. It wasn't care. It was control disguised as concern. She avoided me at breakfast. My stepmom moved through the kitchen like a stranger. Overly polite, overly distant. Her voice was calm, controlled, too controlled. She spoke only when necessary. She didn't look at me directly, and that silence told me everything. People who cross boundaries rarely admit it. They rewrite the story in their heads. I realized then that if I stayed quiet, I would become part of that rewritten version. If I stayed silent, I would carry the weight of her choices. So I didn't. Later that afternoon, when the house finally emptied, when the noise of Christmas, visits faded, I packed my bag. She stood near the doorway when I was about to leave. "You're overthinking," she said softly. "You always were sensitive." That sentence confirmed everything. I looked at her, not with anger, not with fear, but with clarity. "No," I said. "I finally see clearly." I walked out into the cold air, my breath visible, my heart racing, but lighter than it had felt in years. That day I chose myself. Not revenge, not confrontation. Distance, healing, truth. Some stories don't end with justice served loudly. Some end quietly, with survival. And that was enough.